What's going on, everybody? This is Alex once again on another episode of the EOT Newsflash. We are back at it once again with our Theros Beyond Death limited set review, and we are on to the black cards tonight. If you haven't already, be sure to go check out the previous videos for the white and the blue, and of course stay tuned the rest of the week for the rest of the videos, the green, the red, gold artifacts, and land cards. Now, if you've not watched one of our set reviews previously, we're operating on a 4-point scale in terms of ratings. Ones are the cards that you should probably never play. They are the bottom of the barrel draft chaff that you should only reach for when you're scrapping for that last playable. The twos are your more generic filler, the cards that will usually make up the bulk of your deck, more mediocre creatures and spells, things of that nature. And the threes are going to be your more premium creatures, your gold signpost uncommons, your more powerful removals, and a majority of the rares in the set as well. And then the fours are, well, they're the absolute bombs of the set. They're your first pick in draft, the card that pulls you into your color for sealed, and are just all around the best cards in the set. And we also have two additional side categories here. First one being S for sideboard, which are the cards that you should bring in when your opponent presents you with a threat that requires a more, specific answer. Perhaps an enchantment or artifact removal would fall into this category. And then we have the Bs for build around, which are the cards that need to have a deck to be built in a certain way in order to function properly. They'll function otherwise in any deck just fine, but not to their full potential, of course. Now, starting up right at the top, we've got Agonizing Remorse. 1 and a black for a sorcery at uncommon. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it or a card from their graveyard. Exile that card and you lose 1 life. This apparently is, the memory of Daxos haunting Elspeth. Cool story moment. Shit card, unfortunately. The minor upside against escape cards is here. Sideboard this if absolutely necessary. Hand disruption cards like this are rarely good in limited, and this one is no different. Of course, never cast this, as soon as you can in a game if you've brought it in or playing this. Always cast this the turn before your opponent can cast whatever it is that you know's in their deck, a planeswalker or a big threat. The turn before they can actually cast it, when they're most likely to actually have it in their hand. Just, maximize the possibility here. But even with that caveat, don't touch this one. It's a solid 1 for me. Next up, we've got Ephemia, the Cacophony. 1 and a black for a legendary enchantment creature, Harpy, rare, 2/1 flyer. At the beginning of your end step, you may exile an enchantment card from your graveyard, and if you do, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. The stats alone on Ephemia here make her playable full stop. But of course, you're likely to have a decent amount of fodder in your graveyard to power this up, with all the enchantment creatures and just enchantments that are floating around in the set as well, are going to get you a decent number of those zombie tokens. This is a very solid 2 here for me. Like this one, maybe not a first pick, but if I am going to first pick it, I do want to make sure that I am building around it in a specific way to make sure I'm maximizing the value off this card. Pretty cool stuff here. Next up, we have got Aspect of... Ooh, too far, Alex. There we go. One of these days I'm going to figure out a good way to actually scroll these cards intelligently. But until then, we have Aspect of Lamprey. 3 and a black for an enchantment aura at common. Enchants a creature you control, and when Aspect of Lamprey enters the battlefield, target opponent discards 2 cards, and that enchanted creature has lifelink. So this is actually a pretty cool variant on Mind Rot, which are typically mostly playable in limited, especially for slower formats, albeit this one's a mana more expensive, but does have the upside of granting lifelink. Having the lifelink and making it cost extra mana might be the thing that breaks this card from actually being playable, but as it sits, I do like this as, just maybe a 1 of in my deck, especially if I do have a decent number of Constellation enable cards that require Constellation to trigger. So I'm going to say this is lower end filler, but I can see this being a little bit more powerful than I'm going to get credit for if the format shakes out to be a bit slower. Next up, we have got Blight Breath Catoblipas. I don't know how to pronounce this, honestly. I do not. Catoblipas is what we're going with. 4 black creature beast common 3/2 When it enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls gets -X till the end of turn, where X is your devotion to black. Now this beast here needs some real help to justify that mana cost and to get any sort of decent removal coming off of it. -2/-2 off of its base is just not good enough. I'm going to say you're going to be hitting somewhere around X equals 4 before I'm going to consider playing this. So it's 1.5, and I'm still not terribly impressed by a creature that's so high on the curve and does so little by itself. Next up, we have Cling to Dust. 1 black mana gets you an instant at uncommon. Exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, you gain 3 life. Otherwise, you draw a card, and you can escape this by paying 3 a black and exiling 3 other cards from your graveyard. So I actually kind of like this in terms of being flexible in its ability to hit different things in the graveyard. You know, if your opponent presents you with a number of escape cards, you can certainly hit those with that. Any of the creatures that can come back are certainly valid targets for this, but I can also see this just being a decent card draw engine as well. That all being said, though, this is likely just a sideboard card. You know, 1.5 even if you're going to mainboard this. Not very impressive for what it does. There are better ways to gain advantage in black in this set. Next up, we have got Discordant Piper, 1 and a black for a 2/1 zombie satyr at common. When it dies, you create a 0/1 white goat creature token. How many cards in this set actually create those tokens? Stay tuned. So this is pretty underwhelming filler, you know. Baseline 2/1 for 2 is pretty good. The ability to get an extra creature off of it, however, does give this card a bit of a bump in value, especially if you're playing in the black-red sacrifice deck, where having 2 bodies will actually go a long way to make sure you're getting plenty of value out of those aristocrat-esque cards. So, like I said, underwhelming, but does have some value in the specific decks. This is a 1.5 for me. Next up, we've got Drag to the Underworld. 2 black instant at uncommon, destroys target creature, and the spell costs X less to cast, where X is your devotion to black. So unconditional removal that can be discounted. Done. This is a solid 3 for me. I'll even pay full retail for this and not be unhappy. Next up, we've got probably the best art in the set, and also probably the best name as well. This is Eat to Extinction. 3 and a black for an instant at rare. Exile target creature or planeswalker. Look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard. So there's some fun conditional ability to enable escape, which, you know, may come into play, may not. But much like Drag to the Underworld, this is unconditional exiling removal, so this can even hit the gods once they're active. Done. This is a solid 3.5 for me. Awesome card. Next up, we have Elspeth's Nightmare. I'm pretty sure that is a Phyrexian Obliterator on that card, kind of signifying her last moments on Mirrodin before she planeswalked away in the face of imminent death. Elspeth's Nightmare is a 2 and a black enchantment saga at uncommon. Stage 1, destroy target creature an opponent controls with power 2 or less. Stage 2, target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. That player discards that card. And Stage 3, exiles target opponent's graveyard. So this one is pretty underwhelming, unfortunately. I'm looking at this as simply an early game removal spell. Fortunately, there are plenty of creatures with that magic 2 power to be hit with this. You know, being able to strip a key removal spell out of their hand, or, you know, other powerful non-creature spell is quite good, and then getting rid of it forever is also powerful. So each stage does have a decent amount of value to it, and once you add it all up together, you've got a pretty decent playable card. Just a 2 for me. Again, like I said, play this for the removal, and if you get some extra value out of it, you know, that's all the better. Next up, we have Enemy of Enlightenment. 5 and a black enchanted creature demon. Uncommon 5/5 flyer that gets -1/-1 for each card in your opponent's hands. And at the beginning of your upkeep, each player discards a card. So this is pretty sweet here. I'd like to combo this with Aspect of Lamprey to really put the hurt on my opponent's hands. Certainly some decks just won't have the ability to combat the discard here without any sort of meaningful card advantage engine. And beyond that, you know, the stats on this thing will eventually just put the game completely out of reach for your opponents. So this is pretty solid here. It's a solid 2 for me. It's just kind of unfortunate that your opponent has sort of the ability to keep this thing under control. Has some interesting counterplay there, but still quite a powerful card. Next up, we have got Erebos Bleak-Hearted. 3 and a black for a legendary enchantment creature god, mythic rare, 5/6, indestructible, and as long as your devotion to black is less than 5, Erebos is not a creature. Whenever another creature you control dies, you may pay 2 life, and if you do, draw a card. And by paying 1 in the black and sacrificing another creature, target creature gets -2, -1 until the end of turn. Now, like all the other gods, this is quite powerful here. There's a really kind of interesting counterplay here to sacking your own creatures to trigger the abilities here, which in turn sort of downgrades your devotion, but is drawing you cards to up that devotion again as long as you're drawing black permanents. But that aside, this card is pretty nutty. Going into combat with Erebos active or not is going to be an absolute nightmare for your opponent. Just be able to activate that ability on there and weaken their creatures, at will. This is an incredibly powerful card here. Solid 3, 3.5 for me. Very, very good stuff. Like all the other gods, excellent. As is his intervention. X black, instant, at rare, choose 1. Target creature gets -X until the end of turn. You gain X life. Or you can choose to exile up to twice X target cards from graveyard. So pretty cool here. This is obviously just premium removal in my opinion. The life gain is just icing on the cake. And of course, if your opponent does have a very heavily devoted deck to escape cards, the exiling effect is quite powerful as well. This is a solid 3 for me. Next up, we have Final Death. 4 and a black for an instant common, exile target creature. We usually see at least one of these per set. It's a relatively overpriced removal spell at common, but it is going to be universal and mostly unconditional, and this is that for this set. This is a 2.5 here simply because of the high CMC, but this is going to make any black deck that you might play, and it can even be a defensible first pick in draft in a particularly weak pack. So 2.5, I always like cards like this, will always play them. Next up, we've got a weird one. This is Fruit of Tyzeris, a single black sorcery at common. Target player loses 2 life, and you can escape this by paying 3 and a black and exiling 3 other cards from your graveyard. This is strange. I don't really know what to make of this. The hyper-aggressive decks will want to be able to play this, and that's about it. Just be able to put pressure on your opponent, and then, using these to burn out their last couple points of life. And if they have to, they can always, kind of go for that extra reach with the escape clause on there. I'm not impressed personally. I can honestly see myself losing to this card unlimited. I know it's going to happen, just making peace with that right now, but I hope to not have to play this card. There are just more aggressive things to be doing in this format other than making your opponent eat fruit. Whatever. Next up, we've got Funeral Rites, probably one of the creepiest cards in the entire set. 2 and a black for a sorcery at common. You draw 2 cards, lose 2 life, and put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. And just look at that art. The Funerary Mask help newly dead resist the erosion of memory and identity in the Underworld. So creepy. But yeah, effects like this are always playable, so this is sort of like a Read the Bones-esque effect. Definitely playable, especially with that added graveyard clause to fuel the escape cards in this set, and other graveyard shenanigans. Especially in more mid-rangey black decks, this is going to be absolutely playable. If you're up against, a more aggressive red deck, however, I would definitely sideboard this out for something a little bit more proactive, because the last thing you want to do on your 3rd turn is start losing life. But very solid, powerful card here. Definitely give this one a 2 for myself. Next up, we've got Gravebreaker Lamia, 4 and a black for an enchantment creature, Snake Lamia, which I'm kind of confused on because I thought Lamias were just snake people, but whatever. You guys and gals out there on the internet can comment below and tell me that I'm wrong. This is a rare 4/4 lifelink. As it enters the battlefield, search your library for a card, put it into the graveyard, then shuffle your library, and spells you cast from your graveyard now cost 1 generic mana less to cast. So this is impacting your escape cards, obviously. If you're playing this, you're likely to have a few good targets for it, but even if you don't, this is a pretty defensible thing to play. At that point, you just have a 5 mana 4/4 lifelink, and that's nothing to ignore on the battlefield. Pretty solid here, but I would rather much have, you know, a couple good targets, a couple good escape cards that I can actually use to the full effect here. 2.5, pretty good stuff. And then there's this guy. Oh, Gary. Oh, Gary. Grey Merchant of Asphodel, returning from original Theros with some new, in my opinion, better art. 3 black creature zombie, uncommon this time. He's a 2/4, and when the Grey Merchant of Asphodel enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. It wouldn't be Theros without Grey Merchant returning here. It's always playable and limited, the body is powerful, and you're likely to have a decent amount of devotion to power this up and, you know, let this shady trader here take away for you and steal the game. So 2.5, always playable. Happy he's back, I guess. Next up, we've got the Grim Physician, a single black that gets you a creature zombie at common, 1/1, and whenever it dies, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until the end of turn. Now, the hyper-aggressive black decks and possibly the red-black sacrifice decks will have a good home for this. They'll make decent use out of it, but it just isn't all that impressive otherwise. Now, if you do have ways to sack this at instant speed, there's 2 creatures actually in black that allow you to do that. I can see this being sort of a flexible piece of removal during combat that your opponent always has to respect. It's a 1.5, probably is closer to a 2 in the right deck, so it definitely comes with that sort of a B caveat to bowl around. And next up, we have got the Hateful Eidolon. Oh, too far again. There we go. Hateful Eidolon. A single black mana gets you an enchantment creature spirit at uncommon, 1/2 with lifelink, and whenever an enchantment creature dies, draw a card for each aura you controlled that was attached to it. Honestly, if I even draw 1 card off of this, I'm happy with the trigger going off there. This thing is so cheap, I don't really want to expect too much more than that. And I probably wouldn't go all in on 1 creature either, just because, you know, they'll see this coming and probably play around it. You know, it's an aggressive beater to boot. Honestly, it can get an aura step on this thing is just good by itself. So this is a solid 2 here for those really aggressive black decks. Like this a lot, and of course it's a cheap way to enable Constellation quite easily. And next up we have Inevitable End, 2 in a black enchantment aura at uncommon. Enchanted creature has at the beginning of your upkeep sacrifice a creature. Now, this is a bit of a weird removal spell. Obviously, giving your opponent on what to remove from the play is never good, but this does sort of create a sort of a ticking clock on things. So if you are able to stick this, you know, your opponent has to consistently continue playing to the board and continue playing creatures out. And at one point, this will end up cleaning up everything. At that point, you've gotten your value out of it. However many turns it takes, well, that's the downside here. But that being said, it's still a solid removal spell, and a solid 2 in my book. Next up, we've got Lampad of Death's Vigil, our first sort of aristocrat player for the red-black sacrifice deck. 1 black enchantment creature nymph at common is a 1/3, and you can pay 1 mana to sacrifice a creature, and each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain a life. So this is where I'm going to say that the Grim Physician can kind of combo with to create some interesting combat scenarios. Like I said, this is a great way to enable those red-black sacrifice decks, and even the toughness on here is going to let you sort of hold the fort a little bit as you get that engine up and running. So this is a 2 with a solid B next to it, just because this wants to go in a very specific type of deck. So if you are drafting, I would expect, you know, if you're the only one in it, you'll be able to pick up a couple of these later in the drafts and not have to prioritize them. So really good stuff. I'm excited to draft this deck as well. Next up, we have Minions Return. 2 and a black for an enchantment aura at uncommon with flash. There's more of that good stuff. Enchants a creature, and when an enchanted creature dies, return that card to the battlefield under your control. Now, note that it says enchant creature, not creature you control. So this can go after your opponent's creatures as well. I don't know if you're going to have to finagle some sort of, extra mana to use a removal spell or just have combat go your way, but this is a pretty cool trick here, and is a great way to just steal, that your opponent's best creature if you manage to remove it. This is a solid 2.5 for me. I love the trickery that can go into this. Next up, we have got Mire Triton. 1 and a black for a zombie merfolk at uncommon. It's a 2/1 with Death Touch, and whenever Mire Triton enters the battlefield, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, and you gain 2 life. This is pretty much just a pretty cool escape enabler. I'm not looking to play a bunch of these, in case I, start hitting lands I might need to draw. I even put notes in here, playing this on turn 2 with a land light hand, probably not a good idea just in case you do hit those precious lands that you're going to need. As it sits, this is a cool escape enabler, and the Death Touch definitely gives this some flexibility in combat. I'm happy to turn it sideways. Next up, we've got Mire's Grasp. 1 and a black for an enchantment aura at common. Enchants a creature, and enchanted creature gets -3/-3. Simply put, this is excellent removal to trigger Constellation with on a consistent basis. Will kill most things and definitely keep your opponent's creatures shrunk down if necessary, if they do have something quite large to play with. So I like this one. This is a solid 2.5 for me, just for being as flexible as it is. And next up, we have Mogus's Favor, a single black enchantment aura at common. Enchants a creature and gives that creature +2/-1, and you can escape it by paying 2 and a black and exiling 2 other cards from your graveyard. I am not too high on this card, to be completely honest. The +2/-1 is a neat little kind of effect. We don't really usually see asymmetrical power to toughness boosting like this. What am I putting this on, though, that's already at, only the most hyper-aggressive black decks are able to compensate for this? And, heck, you know what? If you can put this on a creature and kill it, I'll give you 10 EOT Newsflash Buckaroos. So, yeah, there you go. If you're scratching for removal and your opponent has a bunch of X1s in their deck, this could be defensible at that. But I'm not super happy with this card. This is a 1 for me, and barely that. This next card, however, I'm completely blown away by this card. This is unreal. It is Nightmare Shepherd. 2 black, enchantment creature, demon at rare, 4/4, flying. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you may exile it. And if you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a 1/1 and it's a nightmare in addition to its other types. So that nightmare typing doesn't really matter here. But the ability to get back any ETB effect as soon as a creature has died is just absurd. And, the stats alone make this thing completely playable. The only downside to this card is that your opponent can kill it. Honestly, this is probably one of the best cards in the set. If they're enchantment creatures, they're triggering more Constellation. If you've got Grey Merchant of Asphodel, holy cow, you can retrigger that again. This thing is just super flexible and well deserving of the 4 that I slapped on it. This card is nuts. Next up, we've got Nyxborn Marauder. 2 black enchantment creature Minotaur, common 4/3. This is black's big enchantment creature that has absolutely nothing else to do. Decent filler, not much else. Can trigger Constellation. Moving on. 2 Omen of the Dead, our 3rd in the Omen cycle, and a pretty solid one at that. It's also our cheapest at a single black mana. Flash, and when it enters the battlefield, return target creature from a graveyard back to your hand. And of course, you can pay 2 and a black, sacrifice it, and scry 2. So like I said already, all the Omens are playable. This one is no different. Get back a key creature that's already been removed in combat. Trigger Constellation at instant speed. They're all playable. That Flash just makes these things so flexible. And I'll be happy to play them in a deck that even just has a modest amount of consolation need in the deck. So very good stuff here, solid 2. Next up, we have what I believe is a first for black in general. Tuna black for an instant at common gets us Pharika's Libation. They'll choose one, target opponent sacrifices a creature, or target opponent sacrifices an enchantment. I don't believe there is another way or card in black that allows you to do this, or at least the enchantment half of the card. So this is actually pretty neat stuff. As neat as it is unfortunately just a sideboard card. Giving your opponent the decision on what to sacrifice is never a good thing in limited. I can see this being pretty decent against decks that are more light on creatures, perhaps a more controlling blue-white or blue-black deck you might play against. So bring it in if necessary, but this is one piece of removal I'm not going to be super high on playing. If I'm lacking, however, that's when I'm going to reach for these, but I'm not going to be too happy about it. Next up, we have Pharika's Spawn. Apparently, this is what Pharika made first when she tried to make the Gorgons. This thing's terrifying. 3 in a black for a Gorgon at uncommon, 3/4, and it escapes for 5 a black and exiling 3 additional cards. Pharika's Spawn escapes with 2+1/+1 counters on it, and when it enters the battlefield this way, each opponent sacrifices a non-Gorgon creature. So this is pretty pricey at full value. I can see there being an argument for just letting this go to the graveyard via mill or discard, then escaping it, but it's not all that great otherwise. The stats are relatively impressive on the front end, and being a 5/6 when it comes back is nothing to scoff at either. So this is a solid 2. This is a fine way to cap off the curve in your black decks, but I think you'll be more satisfied elsewhere with some other more powerful cards. Next up, we have the Rage-Scarred Berserker. 4 in a black creature Minotaur Berserker, common, 5/4, and as it enters the battlefield, target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains indestructible until the end of turn. Not bad here as far as more mid-rangey beaters in black goes. The huge stats is quite impressive, and you'll be happy to have this in any mid-range black deck. Not the ideal curve topper, but certainly a serviceable one. And next up, we have got the Scavenging Harpy. 2 in a black for a creature Harpy at common, 2/1 flying. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you exile target card from an opponent's graveyard. So I quite like cards like this, just a quick little beater for 3 mana that has a little bit of upside to it, and being able to go after escape cards or just escape fuel is definitely a value here. So I gave the Scavenging Harpy a 2 here, filler, and pretty solid at that. Next up, we've got Soul Reaper of Mogus, our other aristocrat-esque card here. 2 in a black enchantment creature, Minotaur Shaman, at common, 2/3. You can pay 2 a black, sacrifice a creature, and draw a card. So again, this is another solid player in the red-black sacrifice deck. The only downside is that it is a bit costly to activate that ability, but it's a common, so what did you expect? But of course, getting to draw that card is quite powerful, especially if you have another death trigger on the board, something like Grim Physician, for instance. Keep going back to the card. Maybe it's better than I thought it was. Who knows? This is a solid 2 for me, though. Next up, we have the Temple Thief. 1 in a black for a human rogue, common, 2/2, cannot be blocked by enchanted creatures or enchantment creatures. So 2-mana 2/2s are always playable, that's for sure. And there are certainly scenarios where you'll be playing against a deck that simply cannot block this. So bearing that in mind, this is a solid evasive beater. I gave Temple Thief here a 2. Moving right along, we've got Treacherous Blessing. 2 in a black for an enchantment at rare. Whenever it enters battlefield, you draw 3 cards, and when you cast a spell, you lose 1 life. Whenever Treacherous Blessing becomes the target of a spell or ability, you sacrifice it. So the aggressive decks in this format will not mind the life loss. The more mid-range control decks will likely have a way to destroy this they've brought with them, or just incidental cards that can do that by themselves. So this card is incredibly powerful. That investment is so low, and that life loss just isn't going to be a problem if this format is a little bit slower like it's looking to be. This is a solid 2.5 in my book. Maybe not a first pick in draft, but certainly something I'd want to have, at my disposal if I have the slot for it. Next up, we have Tiamat Calls the Dead. 2 and a black for an enchantment saga at rare, stages 1 and 2, puts the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, then you may exile a creature or enchantment card from your graveyard, and if you do, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token, and stage 3 gains you X life, and you scry X, where X is the number of zombies you control. This is pretty powerful, not gonna lie here. Being able to fuel escape, obviously, and getting out some of your weaker enchantments or creatures out of your graveyard to get those zombies is quite powerful. There are, of course, a decent number of zombies in the set to go along with this. So you've got some fuel there. I can just see this being the one saga that can actually, not do anything at stage 3 if your opponent has put you under a significant amount of pressure. But if you've got, 2 or 3 zombies, I think you've gotten your value out of that, and any more than that, this card just skyrockets in value. It's a 2.5 for me. Next up, we've got Tiamat Chosen from Death. Black for a legendary enchantment creature, demigod, uncommon, 2-star toughness, whose toughness is equal to your devotion to black, and you can pay 1 and a black to exile up to 2 target cards from graveyards, and you gain 1 life for each creature exiled this way. So this is pretty cool stuff here. I do like the fact that, with enough devotion pips, and black certainly has the most pips in its color identities, just the monocolored cards. So Tiamat could be, 2/5, 2/6, 2/7. He's going to get really big, really quick, I think, here, and be able to hold down the fort and just start, stealing the cards out of your opponent's graveyard to make sure they can't escape anything. Gives him a lot of flexibility here. So I gave Tiamat here a 2.5. There's a lot of flexibility here. Maybe not great on offense, but I don't think it's where he wants to play. Next up, we've got Underworld Charger. 2 and a black for a 3/3 Nightmare Horse at common. It cannot block. It escapes for 4 a black and exiling 3 other cards from your graveyard. And it also escapes with 2 additional +1/+1 counters on it. So, despite not being able to block here, it's going to be hard to stop this thing once it gets going. Early in the game, a 3/3 for 3 is simply nothing you can ignore for too long, and if they manage to kill it, you're going to get it back, and it's going to be even bigger. So this is a pretty solid aggressive creature here. I like that it can play early and late game with the escape ability here. Solid aggressive curve filler here. Not going to be the all-star on your deck, but you're certainly not going to be happy when you find this. Next up, we have Underworld Dreams. This is actually a downshifted rare from M10, I think? Triple black for an enchantment at uncommon. Whenever an opponent draws a card, Underworld Dream deals 1 damage to that player. So the trickiest thing about this card is that you can't just slam this into any deck that isn't heavy on the black spells. That being said, when you are in a very aggressive black deck that can cast this, or even a more mid-rangey control deck, that life loss is eventually going to add up. And if you're beating down with a bunch of creatures, it's going to make it even worse. If you're grinding your opponent out with a bunch of removal spells and you're just keeping the board in control, eventually they will succumb to this. But it goes back to that triple black casting cost. So it's a 2 for me, but definitely in the deck that you can capitalize on that advantage, it's going to be a very hard thing for your opponent to stop. Next up, we've got Venomous Hierophant. 3 and a black for a Gorgon Cleric at common. 3/3 Death Touch. When it enters the battlefield, you put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. So here we have yet another escape enabler. I do like that it has Death Touch. Like we said before, 4 mana 3/3 Hill Giants are always playable, and this one having a little bit of extra value goes a long way to make this playable. This is a solid 2, good curve filler, and it's going to be a great way to keep those bigger threats off your back. Next up, we've got our last black card here, and probably one of my favorite ones. This is Woe Strider. 2 and a black for a creature horror rare, 3/2. As it enters the battlefield, it creates a 0/1 white goat creature token. The answer to that question from earlier, 2. You can sacrifice another creature and scry 1. So this is a Viscera Seer reprint, or a functional Viscera Seer, and this is a little bit bigger and it can actually, fight. And you can escape it by paying 3 black, and exiling 4 other cards from your graveyard, and it comes back with 2 additional +1/+1 counters on it. So this thing is the best enabler for the sacrifice deck and actually comes with its own fodder. This card is just unreal in that deck, and I think just any deck that wants to play black, that has some, extra creatures that are laying around, or maybe some creatures that have been pacified, or with some more effects, this is a great way to, get value out of those and make sure you're constantly hitting gas at the top of your library. Woe Shredder is an easy 3 for me, easy first pick, and like I said, will make a lot of the decks that you play in black at your pre-release. And there we go. All the black cards out of the way. My voice is slowly deteriorating, so thanks so much for hanging out with me tonight, guys. I'm really excited to play Theros Beyond Death pre-release, ready to draft this, ready to jump on Arena, and hope that the draft bots have been sorted out. Looking at you, Throne of Eldraine. And of course, if there's a card down that you think I've just completely underestimated, or if I'm just not seeing it, let me know down in the comments, especially if you have a favorite card you're looking forward to playing. I'd love to know that as well. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And if you're enjoying what we're doing here, definitely consider sharing the video as well to all of your friends. It lets me know that you guys are actually out there watching it. So, thanks so much for watching again, everybody. I hope you guys are enjoying this. Good luck at your pre-release, and I will see you guys later for this week for the rest of the colors. We've got the red, the green, gold, artifacts, and lands to go, and I sure hope my voice holds out, so have a great night.